Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for our Back Bay Fens meeting that's going to focus on the World War II Memorial, the O'Reilly Monument, and the Evansway Bridge. My name is Lauren Bryant, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks for this project. Before we jump into the project, just want to go over a couple of things. We wanted to make sure that everybody knows that we offer translation and interpretation services for our meetings. No one requested those for this evening, so this evening's meeting is going to be in English only. But if anybody's interested in that in the future, they can email us or reach out to us to request that. And I'll put my email address in the chat for everybody in a little bit. We always get asked how people can view the meetings if they weren't able to join us. So just want to make sure everybody knows that this evening's meeting is being recorded and will be available on our project website within about a week. We also will have the presentation and the meeting minutes on there as well. So if any of you guys have missed any of the past meetings that we've done, those are all up to date on the project website too. I'll drop that in the chat for you guys in a little bit as well. So also, if you have any friends or neighbors that maybe weren't able to make it tonight, please feel free to share what you have learned or to also pass on that website to them as well. So for tonight, we'll introduce the project team and we'll do a project status and recap of where we have been so far, what we've talked about at our prior meetings. And then tonight, we're going to present some conceptual drawings for 3 specific areas within the Back Bay Fens Park. As we talked about in some of our past meetings, this park is so large and has so many different aspects in it that we really can't talk about it all in one meeting, which is why we broke it out into some specific themed meetings. So tonight, we're going to talk about the World War II Memorial, the O'Reilly Monument, and the Evansway Bridge. And after each of those specific presentations, we'll stop and discuss each of them, answer questions, get feedback. Then that way you're not trying to remember your war memorial comments until we're all the way done with Evansway Bridge. And then at the end, we can circle back to any of the specifics that we want to after we've been through all 3 sections. So the project team, as I was saying, my name is Lauren Bryant, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks. Kyle Zick is with KZLA Landscape Architects, and they're the lead landscape architects and designers for this project. And he's joined by Jay Lee from his office tonight. And then we also have Elena Saporta with ESLA, and she is with us to present the Evansway Bridge portion of the project tonight. We also get asked a lot about how decisions are made in the parks with the design process. So we always just like to show this. I know those of you who've been with us have seen this several times, but it's important for those who don't know. There are a lot of things that go into that design process in terms of City of Boston priorities, parks and recreation goals, safety guidelines and regulatory, and there's a lot of that here, and Kyle will talk a little bit more about that as well. Not only do we have ADA, we've got Conservation Commission, we've got Landmarks Commission, we have Arts Commission that we're working with, we've got a lot of jurisdictional issues that are all at play when we're making decisions. So that's just for you guys to understand there's a lot that goes into it, but really, really importantly is the community input. And that's why we're here and why we're doing all of these meetings. Is you guys use this park, you know it really well, and we really want you guys to have a say and to help us understand what the park needs. So this is our project schedule up to date. This is our 6th time that we have been meeting on this project. We started off with a pop-up in the park back in October, where we all got to see each other in person and walk around. The team worked on site assessments, site inventories and analysis, which we presented at a Zoom meeting in January. We also presented some conceptual designs for the kind of full park over the winter in February. And then we've been having these series of meetings. The first one was about the Victory Gardens. The second one was sort of pathways and entrances in general. And then this one, like we said tonight, is about the World War II O'Reilly and Evansway Bridge. And from there, once we get all of this feedback and we start to work with all of those different agencies and regulatory agencies that we're going to work with, Kyle and his team are going to be putting together more finalized designs and making decisions based on all the input that we've gathered. And then we'll come back to the community with a briefing to show you guys where things are going, make sure everybody feels we're in the right, going in the right direction and on the right path. And then our hope is that we'll be able to start construction this fall. So that's where I'm going to leave off for the moment. I think, Kyle, am I? No, I'm not. I'm not. So this is, like I said, there are a lot of people that we've been working with on this project and a lot of different stakeholders. So here's a list just for you guys. I'm not going to read them all, but just for everybody to understand sort of the amount of communication and collaboration that's happening on this project and has been happening and is going to continue throughout the entirety of the project. So here we're going to talk about some of those City of Boston priorities that we were mentioning. These are things that we look at throughout all different departments, not just the Parks Department. Climate resiliency, health, addressing equity. Those are all really important in decision making for our parks. And then Parks and Recreation specifically, we look a lot at accessibility, diversity in terms of efficient uses and mix of uses in the park. And also, like I said, that meaningful and inclusive community engagement, because that's really why we're here tonight. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to talk more about the specific project.
All right, thanks, Lauren. So just as a little bit of background and context for the overall project, and this is aptly named the Back Bay Fens Pathways Project. So we are focusing on pathways throughout the City of Boston owned Back Bay Fens Park. And what we do is we look at the condition of these paths, if they're accessible, how water drains, what materials, how they're appropriate for longevity, but also in a historic park. So that's the analysis we've been doing. We're starting to make recommendations. And tonight, like Lauren said, we're focusing on 3 areas. So here is a map of the entire park. Park Drive on the upper part, Fenway on the side and edge. The Museum of Fine Arts is here. That's Agassiz Road coming through. The Muddy River is the blue ribbon. And then other landmarks like Clementi Field, the Kelleher Rose Garden, the War Memorial, the Victory Gardens, but we'll talk about the O'Reilly, the War Memorial, and the Evans Way Bridge tonight. So I mentioned ownership, and a lot of times, well, as a park user, it doesn't matter at all, but for the purposes of this project, it does matter who owns the land. So we have a dark orange that is the ring around the entire park, and that's state-owned, Department of Conservation and Recreation, including the edges of Agassiz Road. And then City of Boston Parks Department is this lighter orange, and the dark gray is the trust office, which is the War Memorial parcel. So it's just worth noting that for you to enter the park, you are crossing state land. And for us to tie our pathways to the edge of the park, we'll be collaborating and working with the DCR. So if you take that same idea and apply the color coding to the actual paths that exist today, this is what you see. So the paths around the perimeter are DCR, including Agassiz Road. The interior paths are City of Boston, and then the War Memorial paths are the Trust Office. Lauren mentioned the different jurisdictions. This is specific to environmental jurisdictions, the wetland resources. The Muddy River has multiple resource areas. They're listed in the legend on the right. The short story is that almost the entire project area is under the Conservation Commission or another environmental regulatory agency's jurisdiction. Only a portion of the Victory Garden up by Park Drive in Boylston and just the edge of Park Drive, but otherwise the rest of the park is basically in someone's jurisdiction. Doesn't mean we can't do anything, just means we need to justify what we're proposing and they'll approve it. So let's get into the specifics of the War Memorial. You all know this space, but I'll use some existing photos to explain some of the issues that we're studying. So the War Memorial it's a highly designed area, with a architectural feature with statuary, seating, and radial pavement coming from the memorial, and there's flagpoles on either side of it. With its age, 70 some odd years old, there's condition issues. And we have to think about building code and accessibility regulations. So just from a condition standpoint, if you all can see my cursor, some of these stairs are a concern. The dimensions, the height of the riser, and the width or the depth of the tread isn't consistent, which it is supposed to be, plus they're radial. So they taper from a narrow point to a wider point. There's also no handrails here. And the condition of the bluestone on the stairs isn't all that good. There's concerns with the stairs leading up to the upper part of the monument. The risers there aren't consistent either. They go from 5 inches to 8 inches to 10 inches. The bluestone generally is in okay condition. It certainly needs some repairs. The mortar joints need to be repaired in some locations. One of the bigger issues, though, is there's this temporary ramp here. And temporary because a lot of times it gets set up for special events and then goes away. It's been up for quite a while now. But the idea is that we want to make this memorial accessible without a temporary ramp, to build something that's integrated into the landscape that doesn't take away from the original design, but provides that access to the upper and lower levels of the memorial. So up here and to the mid-level and below. And I'll explain that more. There's all kinds of very specific condition issues. So there's staining on some of the historic masonry. Some of the mortar joints are failing. Like a granite baseboard almost at the base of the monument is starting to pull away and water's infiltrating there. We have some trees certainly to work around. This tree, which is not the greatest specimen in the world, it's a willow, but it's the largest tree in the Emerald Necklace in terms of diameter. There's an irrigation system. There's a kind of homemade control box behind the memorial that we'd like to make more secure and more permanent. And then there's pretty severe paving issues around the Korea and Vietnam memorials, where they tried a terrazzo pavement around these bronze inlays, and it just it has failed, and it needs to be replaced. So that's showing that more. There's already been patches, but there's a concern that it's going to delaminate or fail completely. And it could also make the bronze susceptible to being stolen or damaged. Lighting is something else we're looking at, because right now it's really just flood lighting, not too much different than sports field lighting. It's for general safety and security. And it's not LED or modern fixtures, so it's not efficient. So we're going to look at this in terms of, can we do this in a more architectural way that's sensitive to the environment, but still provide that safety and security? So as we keep going talking about the War Memorial, we're going to start to think about it from this plan view. So I'm going to start with this air photo just to orient everyone, because you're going to see plans that look like this. But we've talked about the memorial itself, the upper and lower level, those bluestone stairs I started with, and then this inner circle. And then there's radial paths leading out to another circle. And then they have the Korea and Vietnam memorials. There are shrubs, large shrubs at the entrance and at the edge. And then that large tree I mentioned, the willow, is here. And then the rose garden's off here to the edge, the Muddy River off to the right and above. So the things we're looking at are some of the things I pointed out in photos. Do we remove or replace these shrubs? We were going to replace the paving and do some other repairs at the Korea and Vietnam memorials. Replace the lighting, provide universal access, and the localized masonry repairs, replacing that irrigation controller. And what I didn't mention in the photos, there are some shrubs that overhang this walkway and cause pedestrians, bikes, and even maintenance vehicles to go off the path, that then causes wear and tear on the landscape. And these shrubs are really kind of obsolete, because I think they were part of an older idea that isn't really, doesn't have integrity anymore. So we're going to look at that. So now we're going to get into specifics of accessibility options. And we've studied 9 options so far. I think there were more that didn't even make this cut. But the idea is we're trying to explore ideas that I said are an alternative to that temporary ramp, that are integrated well into the design. And we want to minimize the use of handrails so there's not a lot of visual clutter. And we want it to be a route that we feel that will be used by everyone, not feeling like it's secondary or something like that. So I'm gonna I'll briefly talk about all 9. We're gonna focus on 3 after that. But the idea is that we're exploring different things. So if you can see this just for orientation, we've got the War Memorial here. I've changed the orientation of the drawings. The Muddy Rivers to the left, the Rose Gardens to the right, and the Korea and Vietnam memorials are here. So the first idea was, can we kind of play off that radial idea, but not mimic it, and have an accessible path to the lower level and the upper level? But that's important, that distinction's important, because if you were at the upper level, you'd have to go back out and then take the other path to the lower level. So it's kind of a circuitous route. And to note that those paths didn't line up with the outer ring of this. So we had an improvement where we lined up with the outer ring. Then we very literally tried to extend that outer circle and then have paths that go into the upper and lower level, and added a path behind the monument or memorial, which on some old maps, I've seen that as a formalized path. We started to look at other ideas as well, where still with that same thinking that there was a path to the lower level, and then here's a switchback path that goes to the upper level. And then that thinking started to change from here on out, that let's have a path that can go to both levels all from one path. So if you have this radial idea, a path continues and you can go to the upper level or the lower level. And if you're at either one of those, you can get to the other one fairly easily without going all over. Option 6 was actually putting a constructed ramp, a switchback right up against the memorial. We're not in favor of that because we feel like it really starts to be heavy-handed and it detracts from what's special about the architecture. Option 7 was a variation on that, where we started to pull that away from the memorial a little bit, but we feel like it wasn't all that successful. And then 8 had an idea that you still had that path that can go to the upper or lower level, but really swung out heading toward the river and had landscape between those paths just to give it a little more space. And option 9 is a path behind the memorial that allows you to go to the upper or lower. So I will now focus on 2, 5, and 9, the ones we think have the most merit out of these. And we'll look at them from different views, and I'll explain some of the things we're thinking about. So as I mentioned already, this path lines up with the outer ring, and we have a path that goes to the upper level, and this will just be raising the grade to make that happen, and then a path to the lower level. And then there's a path connecting behind the monument or the memorial that allows you to go from flagpole to flagpole. So there's different views, and you start to get a sense of us raising the grade to get to that upper level. We bury some of the stairs to do that. It's a reversible approach so that those stairs would still be there if we wanted to remove that fill. And then the path to the lower level is here. So I'll go through the multiple viewpoints fairly quickly, but you'll get a sense of it from different angles. We're also showing a suggestion of handrails being added to the stairs and to the edge of the memorial. So once you do get to the upper level, you do not step off of it or roll off of it. And just swinging around to the other side, you get a sense of it. So then the option 5 continues that circular form, switches back, and allows you to make a decision to go to the upper level or the lower level. And if you're on either one of those, you can fairly easily get to the other. And this is deliberately on the river side of the memorial, so that on the Rose Garden side, you still feel that monumentality, that the memorial sticks up from the ground and you can see the different tiers. So you start to see a little bit of a bird's eye perspective. There's landscape, and space between the different switchbacks, so that then the landform can manipulate to make that move. But on the Rose Garden side, nothing really changes. And on the river side is where we add a platform so that there's turning ability to get to the upper level, and then you can see the path that gets to the mid-level. So then the other option is an option that where There's a path behind the memorial that goes to the upper and the lower areas, and we bring in fill, and that would be up against the memorial itself, because there is quite a bit of memorial that could be, there's a lot of masonry there to allow us to kind of mitigate the grade there. So from the front side, as I mentioned, on the Rose Garden side, there's really not any change. The river side, the landform is manipulated and filled to integrate this into the landscape. You can see the path going between that large tree and the memorial. And then what's more apparent with this view is the path to the upper level with that platform and the edge protection, and then the path going to the lower level. This is the view of that option as you approach it from the rear of the memorial, and you just get a sense of that landform and the fill. So really from this view, you don't even see much of the path itself. It's more of the side slopes. So continuing with War Memorial ideas, this is specific to the shrubs. So the upper left image is a model of what's there today. So there's yew and deciduous shrubs that line the outer ring of the memorial. And we've heard from you in past meetings that people can hide behind the shrubs, trash collects there, stuff is hidden there, rodents, those kind of things. So it's a concern. It was part of the original design intent, but the issue is that the shrubs have been allowed to grow. So they're 4 feet high and 10 feet wide. I don't think they were ever intended to be of that scale. So what are the options? You know, option one here, you could remove the shrubs, you know, and that solves a lot of the different concerns we've heard. But it does take away from the original design intent, providing that edge to the space. Another option would be to remove the existing shrubs, replant either with the same species or another that would naturally grow smaller and stay at that height, and still line the whole edge of the memorial. A third option would be to have shrubs, but have them at basically marking each one of the memorials, Vietnam and Korea, and also the entrances. And then a fourth option would be to allow the shrubs to get a little bit larger, but not as large as they are today. So then the last thing to talk about is lighting. We don't have very specific design recommendations yet, but we at least wanted to get some feedback. We could do more than just flood lighting here. You know, it could be architectural accent lighting with spotlights that could be aimed very deliberately at the architecture and the space in general. We could light the flags and some of the architecture with some smaller scale fixtures. So that's a good point to stop and get comments on the War Memorial before we go to the O'Reilly.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. I know that Marco had his hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and let him go ahead and ask his question. And then there were a few comments in the chat that I want to see if you can address Kyle too. Marco, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, team. Just a little bit about myself. I was a former board member of Fenway Civic. I was a resident for Fenway for over 20 years. And in the past, I've worked with the Brown Fund and Joe Byrne in this area here. And we had, you know, I've got quite some history with this area here. So I have a few questions. I'll do my best to keep us on time. But as far as the willow, that willow has gone through several major events. And what we see now is kind of it just taking its own course. So I know there was a question in the chat as far as the health of that tree as it is now. So that's my question as far as that. Has that been looked at as far as the condition of that, and is it worth saving?
Yeah, let me talk about that before you go on to your next point. So several arborists for the city arborist has actually looked at that tree. I know at least going back to 2013 and then has continued to look at it. And it's true to a lot of willows. They break apart and they resprout, and they break apart and they resprout. It's weak wooded. They never really die. They're not graceful, you know, in terms of how they continue, but that tree should continue to go on and on and on. The trunk is got a lot of rot in it, but the city looks after it in terms of making sure it's not a hazard. You know, if there was any unstable or structurally unsafe parts of that tree, it would be addressed.
Got it. Okay, and then in the event that that tree, I know the city is steering away from planting willows, but in the event that was to be compromised during construction, have talks happened about what would replace it?
No, we haven't even gone through that scenario because we would protect the tree. I mean, if for some reason it died post-construction, you know, we would, you know, think about it at that point, but
yeah, got it.
We're not even thinking about that scenario because we want to keep that tree.
In regards to the shrubs that are around the existing to use, I agree with all those points as far as trash, folks stashing things inside of there. I would love to see them replanted as is. I do think that maybe, I do feel that it does frame the memorial in a good way. It kind of introduces it and it just frames it from the park. So I would love to see that. But speaking about that, in the future, if any sort of new plantings were to happen at the War Memorial, is that the Brown Fund that would maintain that, or is it parks? Would it be just regular maintenance that happens? Because I know in the past, I've had to open, you know, before 311, but contact the city to try to get those pruned. And usually it was somebody, let's say from the Rose Garden, would come over and do it. So my question about the maintenance of any sort of new shrubs that are planted in that area, has that been discussed?
Any new shrubs would be maintained, I believe, through the Parks Department. We will double check that, but that's part of why Kyle was saying if we replanted it with something new, the plan would be to replant it with a species that would stay smaller so that it didn't need the same type of pruning that the current yews do.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
They would be less maintenance intensive as well.
Perfect. And then in regards to in the past, I know we've had some major flood events, I'd say maybe 10 years ago. Those two catch basins that are around the perimeter, the circular center, I know the outfall for those drains go really are opposite of the gatehouses. If you go back to your map at the beginning where it says 0.4, it's basically there on the edge. And I don't know if part of the project, if they've cleaned that out, or if those catch basins that are there now could be dug deeper to retain more water. I realize it's more or less in a flood, in a flood zone there. But that also compromises, I think, regardless of what's placed down for hardscape, there tends to be a lot of water that ponds there. And I actually have photos of it, the entire circular center flooding to about, 2-3 feet of water. So that's a concern with anything we do going forward, is what does it look like? And I know if it's draining out to the river, if the river rises, that also is impacted as well. So not sure if that's been discussed as well.
Well, we're going to do an assessment of the entire drainage system. We have a civil engineer on board, and we've been also in communication with the Army Corps, the project manager for the Muddy River Phase 2 project. But I'm glad you shared your observation of the amount of flooding, the depth, 2 feet or so in that area. I hadn't heard that, so we can pass that on to the civil engineers. Okay.
Yeah, I can provide photos as well. I've got my my archives there.
Okay, great.
So I could definitely send you that. And then one final question: the lighting in the past, those floodlights that are there now, the photocells are kind of, they're hit or miss. There are times that it'd be on for a few days, they'd be off for like a week. The poles are not in good shape. I would love to see some more uplighting of the monument itself, and not so certain about just having floodlighting. Because I know when we have floodlights like that, it kind of implies that the park is open, but we also want to be safe as far as the path that's there that leads to the footbridge. So I would love to see more uplighting to kind of highlight the monument itself in cooperation with any lights that are placed along the new path to the footbridge. And then one more thing, option 3, I would prefer 3 just because I think it really introduces the monument from the backside if you're coming from the MFA, from Forsyth. If you look in the summer months when the grass starts growing in, you tend to see like a natural path being cut right to the right after you come off the bridge coming from Forsyth,
Yep.
going to the back half of the monument. So I love 3 because I think it really just kind of brings you there. And I think that adds a little bit of safety to it as well. Coming from the backside, since it's not very visible, it's kind of just a blank slate where the box is there for the irrigation and whatnot. So we'd love to see 3 and try to maintain the original design as much as possible without introducing a real big change to the space itself and disturbing the parkland itself.
Thank you, Marco. I appreciate all of those.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Kyle, we had a question and then I'll get to Kennedy in the chat. If we could please put the slide back up that has all the options on it.
Yep.
If that's possible. And then Kennedy, I know you had your hand raised next if you wanted to jump in.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering if this was the first audience these options were presented to, or if the Mayor's Commission on Persons with Disabilities had taken a look at the different options.
So we have talked to the trust office so far and have not had a meeting with the Disability Commission specifically on this this part yet. We wanted to talk to the community and be able to get some feedback and then be able to talk holistically about the entire park with them. Lisa, you've got your hand raised as well.
Right. Yeah, 2 things. Yeah, I like the option 3 also, or any of the options with the path coming around the back and in. I think it would be, if you ended up building up the paths in the front berm. I mean, as Marco was saying, I've lived here 30 years and I'm out with my dog every day around the memorial. It's had some horrible floods, which is why the bases of all the different monuments there are in, and the pavements are in such bad shape because there's been a lot of flooding that the catch basins haven't been able to deal with at all. So if you ended up building up around it, I think that would just increase the flood issues in the future. So something around the back might be better for that. And as far as the willow tree, I mean, I've seen it through several deaths and revival. The last time about 10 years ago, they cut it down, but they left the trunk about 10 feet high, and now it's totally a full tree, which I love personally. I know it doesn't look the best, but for those of us who've been here forever, and you know, it's has a lot of personality and it keeps coming back. So definitely would hate to see anything happen to it. The shrubs are way overgrown. There's a lot of needles in them and all kinds of stuff. So smaller shrubs, maybe less shrubs would be good. Originally, the rose gardeners would take care of maintaining the memorial, and then it was their bosses that in the past some years have been telling them, no, don't do anything outside the actual rose garden. So now sometimes, of course, every holiday where there's going to be veterans at the memorial, they spruce it up and then it's totally neglected. And I know Eddie, the current gardener, would be more than happy to be there and be weeding and pruning, but his bosses are telling him not to. So, and that's been true for some years. So that needs to be worked out, because originally it was always the rose gardeners who took care of it and did a great job, and they were happy to do it. So I don't know exactly what the politics is there, but that needs to be worked out. That's it.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate hearing that background on, you know, who had been taking care of those. And Kyle and I've had a lot of conversations with our maintenance crews out in the park, and we've also been having a lot of conversations with the trust office about the memorial as well, because obviously they own it. So we'll make sure that those conversations about what happens after this project moving forward happen, and then we can maybe report back out on that at our briefing that we have later.
Great.
Thank you for bringing those up. I appreciate it.
And I want to pick up on the one comment about flooding. Any one of these options that adds fill will have to compensate for that fill because we're in a floodplain. So imagine, we add fill, put a path on top of it that provides accessible route. We have to take the equivalent, we have to excavate somewhere else in the park, the equivalent amount of that fill, so we don't have any change in flood storage capacity in the park.
Thanks, Kyle. Steve, I think you had your hand raised next.
I did. Hi, sorry, let me get that focused. 3 quick comments. The first one, Kyle, can you remind me, was it options 2, 5, and 9? Were those the finalists?
Yes, 2, 5, and 9.
Okay. When I looked at this, I disliked 2 a lot from this plan view. But of course, the park user never sees the plan view. So I actually think the rendering that you showed for 2 makes a lot of sense, although you hadn't actually made that point about needing to compensate for any excavation that would require. But personally, I actually ended up liking 2 and 9 better. 2, 9, 5 in that order, if that's helpful. Another thing, and you haven't mentioned this, but I'm going to assume that this has gone into your thinking, and if not, I'd just like to put in a plug for it, is I've always found this section of the park really discouraging because it's so different from the Olmsted plan. And, there's a ball field, there are tennis courts, there's a basketball courts, there's, Clementi Field, there's the Rose Garden, there's this memorial. They all sort of feel like they were kind of dropped in during a period when the city didn't really have a lot of respect for this park and just saw it as, some convenient space to do something. So if there is replanting of those shrubs in particular, and I'm totally sympathetic to the concerns about how big they've gotten and whether that's a security issue, but more about, it is a security issue, but I think it's actually more a trash magnet issue. I would say anything you can do to sort of hark back to the original plant palette, maybe instead of those, trimmed sculptural shrubs, there's kind of a more naturalistic species that does the same thing, doesn't get as big, but also just looks less like it's, dropped in from outer space, which some of those things do at this point. So, and then the final thing on the lighting is, again, you didn't mention this, but I know you're good at what you do, so I assume you were thinking about it. The whole issue of light pollution from flood lighting and uplighting and architectural lighting, I think we should do our best to minimize light spill that comes from the lighting for this area and keep things really focused as much as we can on the ground and not shooting off into the sky.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. By going with LED fixtures that are more precise and enhance the place from an architectural standpoint, but and then control light pollution. I wanted to get back to your comment though about the landscape character, because we have to be a little careful when we talk about the Olmsted design here, because the Olmsted design, there's very little integrity and very little left of it. What you're seeing is a Shercliffe design from the 1930s and 40s. While yes, he was a protege of the Olmsteds, when he was designing this, the formality was purposeful. The Rose Garden, adding Clementi Field because of the community needs at the time. War Memorial is post his design, but it's not unusual for something that he would have done. So, and in their own right, the War Memorial, the Rose Garden, are historic. So when we go to landmarks, they're going to say, well, you know, we really need to think about the original design of the war memorial and not what Olmsted would have done, you know, in terms of the memorial, because he wouldn't have wanted a memorial.
Right. That was my assumption.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if there's a way to do that, if you're going to be substituting species or looking for varietals that grow less large, then maybe there's some room to do something, a gesture in that direction, but maybe it's a lost cause. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that, all those comments. Marie, I think you're next.
Yep. I lowered my hand. I'll try and keep it brief. I was reading the chats. I was really happy to see a lot of people were going in the direction that I was thinking, which was towards option 9. I liked the symmetry of the option 2, but I think for wheelchairs, the thing that I thought with both option 5 and option 2 is option 2 makes you have to go to 2 different sections, depending on whether you'd like to get to the top or the lower part of the memorial. And I don't see it anymore, but option 9 had both of those entry points fairly close together on the same trip. So are people not seeing the display anymore? I'm not seeing it.
No, I'm not either. I think Kyle's working on getting it back up.
Oh, okay. All right. And then number 5 had like a lot of pretty extreme angles, and just imagining going that way on a wheelchair, it seemed like a lot of turns to get to the place. So that was my comment for the access. I also liked how there were guards implemented in all of those designs, because the one thing I do think of with permanent ramps is how it might be used or not used by skateboarders. So in the design portion of the implementation, just thinking about anything that could deter the speed while also accommodating wheelchairs would be great. Then, yeah, just a couple other comments. I liked the idea of having the shrubs because I think it formalizes the area, but agree with what everyone's saying about something that is lower. And then with the lighting, is there a possibility to do 2 types? So the uplighting that you displayed, as well as that, is it called ARN lighting that's more directed?
Yeah, I would think so.
Oh, great.
And
Because
I think that's because it will be maintained by the trust office, that decision will ultimately come from them. But it's definitely, they've seen some of those options that we talked about and seem to be on board with at least thinking about them.
Great. I think part of the reason that it is so floodlighted right now was to deal with security concerns. So for that reason, I would think that just the uplighting wouldn't be sufficient, that it would need to be some type of combination. I think that's all my comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Marie. Pam, you've got a question or comment?
Yeah, I have just one question, and this has come up before, the issue of excavating in landfill and wetland and having to balance that out. And my question is, with all the excavation that's been done with the Muddy River Restoration Project, the removal of the Phragmites, the landscaping, and the just dredging of the channel, does that not count as removal of material, which would give us a pretty good license to fill in other places?
No, unfortunately, it's another project, and they look at each project on a case-by-case basis. So if we fill, we have to compensate for it.
Really?
Yep.
Does that make sense, just logically?
Oh, I don't disagree with your logic, but I know what the regulations say.
So we need to incorporate some of this into MRRP to avoid this problem, is what you're telling me.
Well, I'm not even sure that would work. We'd have to, well, the Conservation Commission would have to know that that's what's going on, but it really needs to be part of our project.
Okay, I mean, it strikes me as, yeah, okay, bureaucracy in the way, but thank you for answering the question.
You're welcome.
Kennedy, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the time again. And just as a disclaimer here, not speaking on behalf of Councilor Bach, as she clearly hasn't seen these designs yet. But I did have a question as we're going through the options. Certainly no expert, but I feel like what I've heard about universal design is that the accessibility should in some way mimic the experience of folks without mobility impairment. So on option 2, and sorry, the picture is no longer showing up for me, but it might just be my phone. Where you have the path to the upper level of the memorial, is it possible to have just a little branch off of that? Because I feel like the organic way to view the memorial is like you're looking at it one way and someone would go down the steps to the other one. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but does that make sense of like the right-hand path to the upper branch if someone were to just briefly switch back and there was a branch to the lower?
Oh, you'd have to look at like option, let me think, like 5, just, you have to use the lengths of the paths as your reference to what it would take to go from the upper to the lower path. It's not just a simple short connection because you have to have the grades less than 5%.
Okay. That
And
makes a lot of sense.
if it's more than 5%, then it becomes an actual ramp because we've talked about that as well. And then you have handrails and a lot of infrastructure. So
Okay.
it's, yeah.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
And
Thank you.
they're all good questions, and that's part of the challenge is because there are the 3 levels and trying to figure out how to get everybody to all the levels, which they can't right now. But then also if you want to go from one level to the next level, how do you do that without having to go all the way back
Okay.
around? So there's
Yeah.
a lot of little intricacies there.
Okay. Yeah, it is complicated. Thanks for a host of options to look at.
Thanks, Kennedy. So I think, Kyle, nobody else has their hands raised. So I'm just wondering if we want to go ahead on to the O'Reilly for right now.
Yep.
And then we can always come back if somebody thinks of anything, or if you think of anything, you can stick it in the chat too.
Sure, sounds good.
It
So
looked like Freddie had her hand raised, but not on the system.
Sorry, who did, Pam?
Freddie is waving at the camera, so I think
Oh,
she has her hand
Freddie.
raised.
Okay, let me. Freddie, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, but I'm not able to wave. Who knows?
Thank you, Pam, for letting me know.
Thanks, Pam. Well, there's a couple of, well, one comment and one question. My question is, because I missed some of the path meetings, will that main path remain scored concrete? Hopefully it will, not being asphalt, so that, you know, fits better in with the stonework on the memorial. And
so that
important.
that concrete path is in poor condition, as you know, so it needs to be replaced. The Emerald Necklace Master Plan says that any concrete path that gets, well, the standard path in the Emerald Necklace Park should be asphalt. And that's as a general path. You know, I know there's exceptions, stone dust and other things, but in the thinking behind that was that it's a darker color and recedes in the historic landscape versus concrete, which feels a little bit more modern.
Yeah, but you know, the master plan is is the master plan. In this case, it is concrete. So why is that not historically part of something that would need to be retained with Conservation Commission, for instance? It's consonant with the stonework in the monument, and it's also consonant with the juncture of the DCR path, which is scored concrete. So it seems to me like it ought to remain scored concrete and not be relegated to asphalt. I think it's improper to have that path asphalt. I hope it will be considered a little bit more aesthetically and historically to replace concrete, like for like. The other, I think that's important, but the other comment I take that you can take it with a grain of salt is I think that the lighting, I guess it's LED, whatever's there now, is ugly. I mean, the color of the lighting is ugly, it's harsh, and it's unbecoming to a soft park. So I don't like the color of the lighting there. And I don't know what the options are for taming that into a softer color. I mean, I know it serves a purpose there to make it maybe sort of inhospitable at night, which it is, unless it doesn't matter to you about aesthetics. If you're hanging out on concrete at night. But I would think that we would want to start out with something a little more aesthetically consistent with the park.
Yeah, that is something we'll look at when it's not LED, it's not LED now, but LED would be more efficient, and there's several different color temperatures, you know, from the bright white that you would want in like an office environment to a warmer light that's more similar to natural light.
Also, you might want to figure out what the light waves do to plants there in all those LED things. I mean, if there's a different botanical effect on plantings from one particular, it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but wavelengths or whatever, because I mean, I think it is not without impact that the lighting affects trees. So
Yep, and we're also cognizant of the light effect on wildlife.
yeah. So anyway, that's the two things.
Thanks, Freddie. I appreciate that. And Kyle, Marco had a question in the chat regarding the concrete as well, that was saying if they repaired specific pads of concrete versus full replacement, can we keep the concrete? And I know you did a specific analysis of the quality of each of the pathways. So I don't know if you can answer that one specifically about individual panels.
Yeah, it's definitely a patchwork quilt, and you can tell that it's been had replacement panels in the past, and it still needs others to be replaced. You know, I think it's at the point where the path should be replaced. So then it's just a matter of what material it is.
Thanks, Kyle. And then again, I think maybe we'll jump into O'Reilly, and if anybody else has any other thoughts on the pathway or the Back Bay or the War Memorial, we can go ahead and put that in the chat and we can come back to it as well.
Right. So the O'Reilly Monument, here's a photo of it at Boylston Street.
Kyle?
Street. Yep.
I'm still seeing the 9 options for the War Memorial.
Oh,
I don't know if everybody else is as well.
yeah.
I'm not seeing anything.
Yes.
All right, let me share again.
And Marco, just to double check while Kyle's pulling this up, because it still isn't showing up yet. There it is, Kyle. The asphalt is not about any vehicles. It really truly is about the asphalt receding into the landscape in historic landscapes. And that's what the Landmarks Commission is really going to look at when we go forward with them, is looking at that master plan. So yes, we can take a look at what those are, but just to clarify, it's not about vehicular load on pathway materials. Okay, sorry, Kyle. Oh, it went away again.
Sorry about that.
Now it's back.
Okay, can you all see it again?
It's on the main cover sheet for the O'Reilly.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So here is a photo of the O'Reilly Monument with the public sidewalk with the granite pavers. The Boylston Street Bridge is in the background. Is in the background beyond.
Kyle, I think you're frozen. Sorry, everybody, bear with us. Looks like Kyle's jumped out and is going to rejoin, and hopefully that'll help.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there.
Kyle, we're seeing not the first page of the O'Reilly now. It's on the history page.
The line drawing.
Yes, exactly.
So this is a line drawing from 1895, showing its original position was different than where it is today. Here's a photo, which is interesting when you start to look at it and see, all right, what's different? We do have a curb separating the monument plaza from the sidewalk. The post and chains are not around the base. There's some different planting, and obviously this planting is fairly young at the time compared to what's there now. This is 1910, 1915. So what are some of the things we're concerned with? You know, we start just looking at the site in general. The Disabilities Commission would not allow this granite paving to be the public sidewalk if we were to propose this now. It doesn't meet ADA or MAB regulations, so that's a concern. To actually have an accessible route to the monument itself would be something we'd want. And then there's condition issues with pavement and also some wear on the side of the sidewalk, which is fairly narrow here in a heavily trafficked area. I already mentioned this, but there's a curb separating the sidewalk and the monument plaza itself. It's, you know, roadway curb height, 6 inches or so on this far side on the left, and just barely flush on the right-hand side, but there's no clear accessible route. There's also some masonry issues. The stone benches here, there's some open mortar joints, there's some staining, there's some cracked pieces. And I've already mentioned the granite pavers and the joints there, which there's some tripping hazards, but also it's just not compliant. And the detectable warning tiles at the curb ramp have large voids around the edges. And some of the pavement in a lot of different places is in poor condition. So think about this in plan view. And this is the Fenway meeting Boylston Street, and this is that turning lane. There's a traffic island. The O'Reilly is here. The integral benches, and this is the granite paving that interrupts the concrete sidewalk on either side. And there's a curb ramp and a crosswalk that gets you to the island. There's traffic signals here and a street light that has a floodlight that lights one side of the statue. So the concerns are some of the things I've already highlighted in photographs, but the sidewalk material is a concern, the lack of access between the sidewalk in the plaza. There's desire lines. People want a shortcut and go off the sidewalk onto the landscaped area to get to this crosswalk. And that really has worn down the landscape. It's just bare earth. And then there's a desire line also from the backside of the monument to this stone dust path. People shortcut there. So we have 4 different options here to talk about tonight. And I've got all of them summarized here. I'll go through them one by one in more detail. But the idea is that we're trying to solve those issues that I just described, making the public sidewalk accessible, improving how do we deal with the desire lines to shortcut to the crosswalk? Do we encourage or discourage the desire line to this path that's to the side? And how do we make this accessible? And the differences are so where I'm pointing now is the monument, and the public sidewalk is where my hand is now. We could remove that curb that separates the sidewalk and the plaza to make them one, but to do that, this light gray shading indicates we'd be repaving the road to bring that all up to be able to get rid of that curb. And that is multi-jurisdictional, because we have City of Boston land, DCR land, DCR land. Another idea would be to keep some of that curb that exists today, but have breaks in it to have an accessible access route on either end of the plaza. And then the pavement could be widened on either side of the curb ramp just to accommodate that amount of flow that we see there, bikes, pedestrians. And we could encourage the connection to that pathway by adding stairs. A subtle change, we still have in option C here, retain that curb, have an accessible route on either end, discourage the connection, don't build stairs, and have barriers like a post and chain or something to keep people from shortcutting to the crosswalk. And then another idea would be kind of back to similar to B, having the stairs to encourage that connection. There's a curb here similar to option C, but then the sidewalk is widened more because of the volume of traffic we see here. Plus I'm seeing tire tracks that maintenance vehicles aren't able to get through this area without going off the sidewalk. So I'll go through each one of these and just provide a little bit more detail than what I just did. So this option A gets rid of the curb between the sidewalk and the plaza. So that's all accessible, sidewalk to plaza and back and forth. But it means repaving the road, bringing that up the 6 inches or so, that the grade change between the sidewalk and the plaza that exists today. And the good thing is it doesn't affect drainage because there's sufficient catch basins in here, but it's an involved bit of work. And in this case, we're discouraging and blocking off the connection to the pathway in the back. Option B has the accessible route on either end of the plaza, retains some of that curb, and widens the pavement. The dashed line is the existing pavement. So you can see we just add a little bit more pavement to funnel people to that crosswalk. And we add a stair, which would have handrails on it to make that connection. And more variations, the barrier to funnel people, then keep them on the sidewalk. The concern there, of course, is, does the stray car hit it? Does someone trip on it? Do people shortcut even sooner? Or does a maintenance vehicle take this out? And then because there's other barriers here, having a barrier at the back here. And then the concept D, similar, but we're widening the sidewalk. The dashed line again is the existing width. So extending the pavement for those maintenance vehicles, the pedestrians and the bikes, all to get through this area or to the crosswalk. So I think I'll go back to the summary slide and we can take comments.
Thanks, Kyle. Marco, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just looking at these, and we've got that crosswalk right in front of the monument, and I feel like once you see folks coming out of Fenway on a game night or concert or whatnot, the volume that's at that intersection to get to that island, I feel as there's always going to be a lot of folks that are going to be just kind of backing into the monument area. And when you looked at all of these and you came up with these proposals, was taken into consideration what happens with the Richardson Bridge in the future eventually? I feel like any sort of plantings or grass behind the main street, the curbing is just not realistic. I think we're always going to see this always be a dusty, barren area all the way over the bridge as you get to the Fenway Gardens or the Victory Gardens. So, I mean, concept C, I enjoy the fact that it seems like it can handle more volume, but I also feel like it looks like a mass of just concrete, and there's no, it doesn't really take the traffic of the pedestrian traffic away from protecting this monument, because I could just envision no curb there. It just kind of opens up to just, I don't know, I'm concerned about keeping this protected in a way, but still functional. But I also feel like that crosswalk is just in a, not the best spot, and it can never really handle the volume that exists in this meeting area. So just overall thoughts, it's tough to even say which is the best right now, but I do think there will always be a lot of gatherings there to try to get folks across the street, which means there's going to be a lot of breaking down of any plantings along the edge of the road. This one's a tough one. This is a tough one.
Yeah, thanks, Marco.
Yeah.
Marie, you've also got your hand raised.
Yep. Hi, so thanks so much for this. I have to say it's super exciting to see this being addressed, and now that the monument's done, getting the plaza done is just incredible. And I saw Kimberly Hutter was on here earlier, but I think really have to thank Senator Will Brownsberger for getting that funding put aside for us. I know I said this in the previous time that I got to see this, but I think with the concept of widening the paved area in item A, we do have a lot of traffic with Red Sox, and we have a lot of cyclists that come in there. But I know one of the concerns had been, if you open up that area, will people increase their improper crossing, outside of the pedestrian crosswalk zone? And my impression is that yes, they would, and that would not necessarily be a safe thing to do. Same thing with enclosing areas with chain link. I think sometimes the crowds just press so strongly that limiting them in that way could also pose a danger. And the point about maintenance vehicles is a good one too, because it does get messy in the winter time. So for that reason, I really like concept D the best. And I have to say, I love the connection via stairs to get onto the back path. I saw a family coming up the other day. They had strollers, so they probably wouldn't have been able to take their strollers up, but they were meandering on the stone dust path and they entered the O'Reilly Monument from the backside. So overall, so exciting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marian. Thank you for all of your advocacy for it. It's really amazing. Pam, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. A couple of comments. First of all, the plantings along the roadway there, I can't imagine that that would ever be successful, given the amount of salt and sand and winter damage that is caused to plants along roadways like that. And my other comment was going to be the sort of knee-high chain link. I don't think stops any able-bodied person from climbing over it or stepping over it. So I would definitely go with the stairs. As long as people are going to do it, you might as well accommodate them. I walk to the crosswalk frequently. I've never really sat and studied it, so I'm not going to claim any, great deep knowledge, but those are just two comments that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate those. Steve, you've got your hand raised next.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I would advocate, as much as we can do this within ADA guidelines, to make where it seems like every concept has increased paving of some sort. And I would advocate as much as we can for permeable pavers. And maybe that's actually the solution for the strip that borders the street. We have in the West Fens on Boylston Street, we have a lot of those now mandated, I think, by the city's guidelines, these gray brick pavers that are actually water permeable, or the joints are something allows water infiltration. The other thing I would say is I totally see the ruination of this path, because I'm through there multiple times a week, not multiple times a day. And I wonder if it wouldn't make sense on what I would call the north side, the upper side of the entry from the island and the crosswalk, just to pave that thing with maybe it's kind of a gradual fanning out, but just to really increase the paving in that direction without necessarily needing it to be symmetrical on the other side, because I think the volume is clearly going in that direction, not in the other direction. That, of course, is contrary to framing the statues, so that may be a non-starter. Then just one final other question is where the steps or chain links or bushes are proposed to short circuit or make easier access to that path behind the monument. The city for years has had a crappy oil can trash barrel there, which disappeared a few weeks ago. But I just wonder if there's this is a place, not so much in the past year, but 2 years ago, this was an enormous congregating area for unhoused people. And there was constant debris there from meals, there were items of clothing left, needles, of course. So I just wonder if there shouldn't be some thinking for a kind of a nicer way to incorporate some trash receptacles. Maybe it's just where they've been before, kind of behind that curving wall, but maybe slightly nicer ones than these sort of like, oh, look what we found in the, in the public works yard. There were some leftover barrels. Let's use that. So that's just something to consider is, basically more. What you've done, I think, is great because you're trying to refocus on the monument, but also deal with a place that has enormous volumes of foot traffic, which we want to encourage. And I guess, sorry, there is one other thing. Another idea is maybe instead of, to sort of piggyback on what Pam said, maybe instead of plantings in that strip along the road, maybe it's just crushed stone, which is kind of a transition, or as I said, it could be permeable pavers. End of comments.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate all those. I did want to jump in on the trash receptacles, and Kyle, you may have some things you want to jump in on after that too. In terms of the trash receptacles, that's definitely part of what we're looking at as part of the project and all the site furnishings along the pathways. We didn't really get into that as much in this presentation because we were looking at the specific elements. But Steve, and I don't remember whether you were in that one or not, but on the website, the presentation from meeting 4 is more specific on pathways. And if you click on that, there are some images of trash receptacles in there as well, in case you wanted to take a look at some of the ones that we were thinking about.
I would say anything is better than what we have now. So.
Yeah, we like to, when we redo the parks like this, we like to put in permanent fixtures as opposed to some of those 55-gallon drums. And there'll always be a time and a place, seasonally, sometimes that we bring more out to a park. But we are looking at putting more permanent ones in as part of the project.
Could I, as long as you're answering, Lauren, could I ask, is there any thinking about adding, as you have in the common, recycling bins next to the trash cans?
So yeah, this is a tricky question. I wish we had it in every one of our parks. The rollout is slow, and we're working on rolling out for the parks system. One of the things that we have been doing, and I don't know that it's going to happen during the duration of this project, but a lot of times, how under our permanent receptacles, we put in a concrete pad, right? It's easier to clean. It doesn't get as messy. What we've been doing a lot in parks that recycling isn't there yet is making that pad wider so that it can accommodate the recycling when it's time to roll that out. So as of right now, I don't think it's going to be part of this project, but we're at least going to make sure that we plan for the future.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I don't see any more hands raised. So Kyle, does it make sense to jump into Evans Way now and turn it over to Elena?
Yep.
Elena, you are muted.
I was saying good evening, everyone. So some of you were at meeting number 2 where I presented this site analysis slide, but I will reorient everyone. The Evans Way Bridge is at the juncture of where Fenway turns the right corner and the Muddy River also turns a right corner. And if you look at the, let me see if I can, oh, my cursor works, great. Here's a context map. Here you have the Gardner Museum, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, the MFA parking lot. The MFA is here, and the bridge location would be right there. So the bridge burned in the 90s sometime, and so it's been missing ever since. And what's left now are these concrete abutments on either side. The bridge was 10 feet wide and around 80 feet in length, and it went from here to here. The approach to the bridge lines up with the main walk through Evans Way Park, which was one of the original entrances conceived by Olmsted into the park system. Once you're able to cross using the bridge, there's some beautiful features on the other side. There's the most beautiful ash tree I've ever seen. Here is number 2. And then there's the sycamore alley that Shercliffe designed, which is still in beautiful shape. So that would be number 1 here. So there are many treats ahead for visitors, people using the bridge. Next slide, please. So we spoke with Landmarks a few months ago, and they said the replacement bridge should either recall one of the historic bridges in the area or should be something contemporary, something completely different. So the 3 concepts we're looking at are, one is concept A, which is the existing bridges. The original bridges were all by Shercliffe, and they were all wooden bridges, similar in style to the Evans Way Bridge. Those 2 were replaced in the 60s and 70s by Carroll Johnson and Associates with these concrete bridges, which are around 6 feet wide, about 50 feet long. Interestingly enough, Shercliffe went on to design the Esplanade in Boston along the Charles River, and the design of the bridges there are 5 bridges, is similar to this. So we think that maybe Carroll Johnson was influenced by Shercliffe's designs on the Esplanade. So the bridge is masonry with a coping and very simple railing. Concept B would be to replace something similar with a similar design vernacular to the Shercliffe Bridge, which you see here, but using modern materials, more sustainable materials. The wood just doesn't hold up. So it would be recalling the look of the Shercliffe Bridge, but using steel in lieu of wood. And the third concept is to really play up the foliage and then the nature in the Back Bay Fens and come up with a theme that really reflects the natural beauty of the Back Bay Fens. So this particular photograph is of an ash leaf. It's a compound leaf, and it says it's similar to the yellow tree that you saw in the previous slide. Next, please. So here's concept 1. It's a masonry bridge. You can see it's a much longer span than the other 2 bridges. It's 80 feet from here to here. This is the uphill side, so the Gardner and Evans Way Park would be here. The existing path is here. You would have a slow descent down. Then the bridge would be an even arch. It would be symmetrical about the center line. And then once you got to the other side, it would drop down. So you're going from around elevation 15 to around elevation 12, but in the middle, this is symmetrical. And the grades are such that the waterway, which is at elevation 8, would be navigable if you ever needed to maintain the river with say a rowboat or a canoe. So here again, this masonry bridge, coping, very simple railing. The slide on the left, bottom left, is one of the Esplanade bridges. There are 5 bridges in all. They're very similar in style. It's just a simple arch, heavy masonry piers on either side, and a simple railing. And here's a close-up of the Carroll Johnson Bridge. This is the one that lines up with the north side of the MFA going towards the Rose Garden. So again, very simple railing and stone coping. So next, please. So this is using inspired by the Shercliffe design with the cross bracing. We couldn't build this now because there are no pickets. It's just open railing. So this is a design I saw in the Charles River in Newton. So it has the cross bracing and pickets and then the top rail. And again, you're going from the Fenway down, very shallow arch, and then down towards the path leading to Clementi Field and the Rose Garden. As recently as 2018, before the Corps of Engineers came through to do the dredging, you could see the bents. These are the wood supports that were still there 5 years ago. So next, please. And here's a third concept, which is kind of the contemporary interpretation. And here's kind of an ash leaf motif. I don't know if you can zoom in on this. Is it possible to zoom in on the bridge, Kyle?
Oh, bridge, sorry.
Oh, the bridge itself, yeah. Oh, it's kind of fuzzy, but anyways, so it's a very lacy feel, and you can see through it's very transparent in a sense, because you can see the vegetation through the fence. And so it's almost goes away. And some of you are familiar with Rambler Park a few blocks away, where there's a fence using a swallow motif. So it'd be similar water jet cut steel, dark color. So I think that's it.
Perfect. Thanks, Elena. And just sort of jumping back before we open it up for comments and questions, jumping back to one of the things we talked about earlier in terms of what goes into the decisions of how we look at these. This is one of those where there's a lot of agencies that are involved and will be a part of the conversations. This will work with Conservation Commission, will also work with the state in terms of the waterways, the Landmarks Commission. So there'll be a lot that goes into this, and we've started those conversations with all of those entities to start to get their initial thoughts, so that we weren't presenting things or getting feedback from the community on things that were way out of possibility. But what we'll do from here is, I just want to make sure everybody understands. So we'll take the comments from here and we'll go back, because we wanted to have the feedback from the community for our second round of conversations with all of those agencies. So just want to make sure everybody understands sort of what all goes into all of that. And then Kyle, maybe when we are getting the conversation started and the feedback, could we go back to maybe at least the there we go, that's the right one. Awesome. Okay. And then Pam, I think you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple questions. One is on some of these designs, it appears that there's a place under the bridge that would be very attractive for homeless people to camp. And I just want to put that out there because I think that's a concern. Second thing is, I have looked carefully at the Rambler Park, and I think that's powder coated steel. I'm not sure. And there are places where it appears to be cracking a little bit or wearing a bit. And I'm wondering if you're looking at Corten steel for the railing on Concept C. And I happen to be a huge fan of Corten steel. So I'll just put that out there. And those are my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. Nobody else has their hand raised, but I'm assuming other people have some thoughts. Anybody else want to jump in? Ooh, Marco. Marco, are you able to unmute?
Yeah,
Oh, there we go.
So out of curiosity, in 2009, the decking of the Forsyth Bridge was repaired or was replaced. What's the condition of the other two bridges? And I guess what I'm thinking about is, yeah, what's the condition of those other two bridges? Because I'm just curious as like in the future, if those were to need repair or replacement, is the Parks Department or the master plan preferred to keep what's there, or you know what I'm saying? Like, is that what's the direction that the Parks Department and direction they're going in with these bridges?
Yeah, so Kyle may be able to answer the question on the condition, because I know that he went out and his team did a lot of conditions assessments. So I know that they looked at it. Those two bridges aren't part of the scope of this project, so I'm not sure how much detail he has on those.
Yeah,
Sorry, real quick, Kyle, because I'm just thinking long term. Because in a few years, if we're now talking about the other two bridges, then I would love to make a decision based on going forward, what's the vision for all these footbridges? Should they all be the same? Should they look at like the ones in the Esplanade? Or do we have our version of this unique, Zachem at the entryway into the Fenway? Like, does this have to be a special piece? This is the crown bridge out of the other three, and just kind of thinking long-term overall.
I think we looked at the two other bridges, the concrete bridges, just from us, the walking surface and the railings. There are some cosmetic issues with the walking surface and then some of the railings. There's some regulatory issues, but we didn't look at the bridge from a structural standpoint.
And Marco, nothing's been brought up with Parks Department in terms of the structure of those, in terms of them needing to be part of this project or needing them to be thought about in the next 5 to 10 years. We'll definitely continue to keep a look at them. I know that I'm fairly positive that the state does all of our bridge inspections, and nothing has been brought up to us. I will double check that and can get back to you guys at our next briefing as well. But in terms of the scope of this project, we really aren't planning on replacement of those other two bridges in terms of our thought process for this one. Steve, you've got your hand raised as well.
I do. The irony is, I was thinking I wouldn't come to tonight's meeting and I haven't shut up the whole time. So obviously that was a bad original impulse. I just wanted to weigh in on that, on the concepts. I honestly, unless there's some strong reason to go with the original Olmsted design, the cross bracing, even if it's done in steel, it just feels so, it feels like it doesn't, if there were two other bridges like that, it would make sense to me. But the design would almost feel like a parody of an Olmsted design because it's so much one of a kind. Having said that, I really like the concept C a lot, even though it would be different from the other two bridges. And I think one question, which one of the earlier commenters also, I think it was Marco, raises, do we want this to have a certain kind of, I don't know, presence that the other two bridges don't have, partly because this is more of an entryway from a larger, because the park curves around there, so you're sort of bringing a lot of access, you're getting a lot of access from a lot of different directions. And also, if Elena can correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like this is actually a much longer span than the other two bridges.
Yeah, it's approximately 30 feet longer than the other two.
So, I mean, I think Rambler Park is an excellent example of what this looks like. I assume I don't have I mean, I like the blue there. I would think we would want green here, but I could see Corten steel. There's a certain way that, especially European cities will do kind of modern things in historic settings that don't make any effort to be evocative of the historic setting, but really just say, this is a growing, evolving landscape, and that may not be appropriate here. But I do think there's some reason to think about that design as a possible divergence from the other two bridges. That's all.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And that's why we're here. Don't apologize for jumping in with all the comments. That's why we're here tonight. Karen, you've got your hand raised next, I believe.
Great. I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Karen Bonnie Brodek. Sorry about the ambulances in the background. I'm president of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. I'm so glad. I know there's been a lot of meetings, and June and Jack from my team, I think, have been at most of them. I'm very excited about a lot of aspects of this. You may know we have a public visitor center with a public restroom in the Back Bay Fens. We're really excited about more people being able to come and use it and just also feel more comfortable and improve access throughout the park. So Lauren, Kyle, Elena, the whole team, they've been working on this. I know it's complicated and there's a lot of parts to it, but it's God's work. So thank you. I'm very excited about building back this bridge. I was surprised when I started here 6 years ago to learn about the history of this. In fact, I think one of the first elected officials that I ever met with, Jeffrey Sanchez, told me that this bridge needed to go but come back. It was about connecting neighborhoods. This bridge connects a lower income community across to connect them with park. And I'm very excited that so many worked to get funding to move this piece of this project forward. I'm very proud that in some places people are putting up walls, and in Boston we are building bridges. So I think it's great. I think I also I don't have a hard and fast opinion about what the design should be, but I do think that a lot of times when we make fake I know, and again, there's a lot of folks that are going to weigh in on this. There's a lot of commissions. It's not necessarily what one or the other of us think, but I do think that it's great to be able to tell the history. I hope whatever we do out there, I hope there's information about what the bridge had been, what the history had been, maybe with signage or a QR code to explain, what the original had been. And then I really like to, that the U.S. Secretary of Interior's guidelines for historic preservation in the United States of America for over 20 years now talk about things being built of their time. Not trying to be of another time. There are times when you should actually build something so it is exactly made to historically match the exact same materials and in the same way. But then they also talk about the fact that making something that looks, with another technique or other ways, you actually can fool people or confuse people about what the original materials and things actually were. And that it in many ways it is better to make something of its time. Perhaps it's in dialogue in some way with those historic pieces. And so I am also intrigued by Concept C or something of that kind. I think, and I'd love to hear more about being able to explore these things. And I know that I think in connecting the neighborhoods that have not been able to easily access the field from that part of the neighborhood is important. And you may remember a few years ago, the Conservancy put up, with the help of an amazing artist, Fujiko Nakaya, some fog sculptures in that area. And it was really frustrating that there was like a path led from there. And then just like, if you were walking there, you could just like looking at your phone, not looking at your feet, you could just like walk into the river. That's not cool. And so I really would like to, see those connections made and extend welcome. I know the Isabel Stewart Gardner and folks there would also be very interested. I think there's a lot of interest in that. So I'm very excited about this, and I hope to be helpful in conversations going forward. I know there are funds to be raised and alliances to build with a lot of parties to bring this to a place. And I think bridges, especially even small bridges, which this is still a relatively small bridge, I think has the potential to really be something special. And we have thought actually about bringing out the fog sculptures again, and that would be a really fun thing to do once we get a new bridge in there. So I'm excited, and thank you all for all of your work. And thank you to the community members that came at night, in a very nice warm night when you probably like to be outside, to stare at a screen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate it. And Marie, I see your hand raised. I just want to make a comment on one thing that Karen said. And it was something that I neglected to say earlier in the meeting, but it's really important. When Karen was talking about the fundraising for this bridge, one of the reasons that we're also talking about these three parts of this project separately, and if you guys remember from our initial slides and schedule, is that these three elements were added on to that Back Bay Fens Pathways project, right? So these are added on, and similar to the jurisdictional issues that Kyle was talking about, we also have different funding sources for each of these as well. And so that's why we've been doing a lot of coordination with different groups. We have the Brownsburger funding, like Marie was talking about, for the O'Reilly We have the trust office funding for the World War II. We have CPA funding that is funding the design for the bridge work, but there is not construction funding now. And so that's what Karen was talking about in terms of needing to do fundraising and looking towards helping to get this bridge funded. So just to throw that out there is also part of why these conversations are a little bit separate as well, because they all have their unique little way of being funded and being incorporated into this overall project too. So when Karen mentioned that fundraising, I just wanted to clarify that for everybody.
Thank
and
you.
Marie, yes, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks so much. And this is another super exciting part. Thanks to Elena and everyone who's been working so hard on this. I did put a question into the chat about boating activities and whether that would be possible for all three. I think that I've seen the egg oilers using the waterways for that purpose. And I think that maybe the 1970s report by Carol Johnson did mention pleasure boating, but I don't know if it's in the most recent plan. I just, as someone who uses the Back Bay Fens as my park, think it would be awesome to think that someday you could take a gondola along the muddy river. So that's one question. And then, you know, as far as design goes, I'm not a historian or anything, but I do think about this park as being the place that I go to for a passive park experience. I don't have other parks around. And I appreciated that we don't want to recreate history, but in the same vein, I do have concerns about the focus of built items in the parks and the timeless nature of them, because trends and materials do change. So when I think about what my experience would be like entering the park, seeing those ash trees, seeing the ash trees and was it the plane trees? I can't remember what species that it was, the LA.
Sycamore, yeah.
Yeah, sycamores, I'm sorry. Thinking about the experience that would put the parks at the forefront, I think would be important for me. So I don't know, I like concept A. I'm sure that concept C could work as well, but I worry about the timelessness of whatever is implemented, and also the precedent for implementing changes into a park that really does serve as like, here's our daily park experience to get out of our small apartment. So thanks. I guess I'm not expressing any particular preference, but just some concern.
Thanks, Marie. I think it's helpful, and it's good to hear more of those thoughts on these. And in terms of the question about navigability of it, I know that it is considered a navigable waterway. In terms of what the future of pleasure boating is, and that's not something I've gotten into, but I can definitely ask around, and maybe we can talk more about that when we do our briefing as well. I'm not sure if that's the right word for pleasure boating on there. Anybody else have any other thoughts on the bridge while we've got these up? Marco, get your hand raised.
Yeah, question. Would this bridge be lit at all? I know the other bridges have, well, yeah, they have the floodlights. What would lighting, would just be path lighting that leads to the bridge? Yeah, what would the lighting, would there be lighting incorporated with any version of this bridge?
I believe our current plan is just that it would be pathway lighting to get to the bridges, consistent with the other bridges within Back Bay Fens. Marco, your hand is still raised. Did you have another question too? I just want to double check.
No, I'm fine. I got lazy with
Okay.
my hands.
Oh, okay. I just didn't want to not have you talk if you had something else. Anything else on the World War II Memorial or O'Reilly Monument that anybody's thought about since we moved on from those that we can jump back to? Karen.
Hi, Karen from the Emerald Necklace Conservancy again. I really can tell you guys are digging into a lot of the details and thinking about all the challenges of, access and lighting. And I really appreciate, everything I've heard tonight. One thing that I think is a struggle for parks departments like Boston and every other city I've worked is, it's wonderful to invest in these landscapes, trying to make sure that whatever we put in, we can maintain, that the materials and the species, the plants and those things are things that, we are either currently staffed or will be staffed with more resources in terms of maintenance to do. And many of you may know that, the Boston Parks Department, Town of Brookline, and DCR are the main property owners and staff the parks and the Conservancy. We supplement that. We have a watering truck. We do a lot of tree planting. We do a lot of cleanups, but there, there's a lot out there to do. So, Lauren, I trust, I hope that, you're working as closely as you can with operations. And if there are ways we can say like, hey, this is actually what we need. So we need more resources to do maintenance. I, of course, will, as I do every year, be at the budget hearings in a couple of weeks at the City Council and advocating for more maintenance resources for our department, because, there are 6 bodies, between 5.5 and 6 bodies that take care of the entire necklace from the Boston Park side. It's just it's a lot of land and not a lot of people. And so, I'm assuming you guys are focusing on trying to put in the things that require the least maintenance possible. And that's also kind of heartbreaking because you want to make sure we're also giving the community the most. So I guess that was just a speech, not so much a question. Lauren, I don't know if you have any, I don't know what you're going to say.
So, yeah, that is a challenge, right? It's a challenge in all of our parks. And one of the things that we have often found is that when we renovate parks, they are a lot easier to take care of and to maintain, because a lot of the issues that were happening with, whether it be the materials, the condition, any of those things, that bad condition or that rough condition isn't there anymore. So that allows people to spend time doing other things. So we have found that when we do those renovations, that does help as well. The other thing is that we want what's best for the park and the users as well. So yes, we do look at maintenance friendly items, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing that we're looking at. And that doesn't mean that we're making negative decisions or not the best decisions for the park. We're just trying to weigh all of those together. I don't know if that helps at all, Karen. Oh, you're muted again. Hang on a second. What about now, Karen?
Okay, I think it worked. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess I think there have been a couple of capital projects when I first started that that we didn't have maybe as close of a dialogue around, like, these pieces are the ones you guys can take care of. Here are the ones that perhaps we can assist with. And I would really like to do that. I mean, this is maybe just a conversation for you and I, Lauren, to have.
We can have that.
I'd like to figure out, like, are there pieces that you might need a little extra love for, and what could we do? Because there are a lot of pieces. I mean, this doesn't have maybe as much. I mean, this is going to have planting. Maybe it isn't as focused on planting. It's more the pathways, but it's going to have those elements. So I'd love to just make sure we have a plan. So thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Karen. And I'm absolutely happy to set up the conversation and have those chats for sure. Kennedy, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, this will be a much smaller comment, but thank you for this great conversation tonight. Seating didn't come up on this meeting, but I know it's been a discussion on previous meetings, and I had a message from Councilor Brock actually this time, that I understand that there's a delicate balance on knowing whether the community sees a utility or desire in more benches, but just wanted to pass along that she's excited about the potential for additions in the street furniture aspects, just since there aren't that many places to sit in the park today. So just want to be sure I got that in there. And thanks so much for the conversation.
Thanks, Kennedy. I appreciate that. And for anybody that maybe hadn't been at those past meetings, similar to where I was saying earlier, that on the project website, the meeting number 4 does have a presentation that's specifically more about the pathways and all of those site furnishings that are along the pathways. And so there's some more information on there about those benches that Kennedy was talking about, if anybody's interested in those too. And then I'm also going to, I know I did it at the beginning, but I just put back in the chat my email address and also the project website. So if anybody wanted to go check out those meetings, please do that. And again, I just want to say a really big thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's beautiful out, and I'm sure you guys would all rather be, out doing something wonderful outside, but I really appreciate all the feedback and all the time that you guys have given us and all of the information. And again, anybody who may not have gotten a direct email from me about this, I am happy to add you to my email list for future updates on the project. So please feel free to grab my email address and send any thoughts or questions my way as well. So thank you guys all again, and I appreciate your time tonight.